Jamshid Sharifi through the veil. Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York. I'm Amy Goodman in North Carolina, and Juan Gonzalez is in New York. We're broadcasting from Raleigh, North Carolina, as part of Democracy Now!'s, more than month-long 70-city tour. We head to Ohio next today, to Athens, Ohio. But here, the Carolinas have been particularly hard hit by the economic crisis. South Carolina has the second highest unemployment rate in the nation at 11%. North Carolina is just behind at 10%, 10.7%. Despite the high unemployment rate in South Carolina, the state's governor, Republican Mark Sanford, has refused to spend $700 million in stimulus funds, education, and public safety. Instead, he wants to use the money to pay down the state's debt. The governor's decision has infuriated many in the state, including fellow Republicans. Senate Finance Committee Chair Hugh Leatherman, a Republican, recently said, quote, "If my house is burning down, I don't get in my car and drive to the bank to pay off the mortgage. I put out the fire." I think that's where we are in the state of South Carolina today. We need to put out the fire, he said. Well, to talk more about the region's economy and other issues, we're joined by Chris Crom, Executive Director of the Institute for Southern Studies and a writer for the blog Facing South. Welcome to Democracy Now! What about the economy here in the Carolinas, how it relates to the overall global economic meltdown, Chris?
Well, W.B. Du Bois once said, as goes the South, so goes a nation. And I certainly hope that's not true when it comes to unemployment and job losses. The fact is the Carolinas and the South have been absolutely devastated. We've seen the labor market absolutely collapse. Every day in North Carolina, 600 people are losing their jobs, a net loss of jobs. And what you're finding, now remember, these are communities that for 10 years they've been hammered in manufacturing, the furniture industry based North Carolina, completely lost. But we're now finding is these communities, these are people in the banking industry who are losing their jobs. I once just talked to a guy in Gastonia in western North Carolina. He had worked for a textile firm for the longest time, for about 20 years. He lost his job there, somehow got a job at a bank. He just lost his job at the bank, working for Bank of America. And you're seeing that it's a region that, especially in these times of economic crisis, this is where issues like the lack of unions in the South become such an issue because workers suddenly find themselves without the protections that workers in other parts of the country have in terms of severance and benefits when they lose those jobs. So you have this massive dislocation in a part of the country where people don't have much of a safety net, and that adds up to a huge crisis.
And Chris, you mentioned Bank of America. Most people aren't aware that it's headquartered in North Carolina, and the impact on the state of this huge financial institution that grew so rapidly in the past few decades being sort of at the center of this enormous collapse.
Well, I think few people know that outside of Wall Street, North Carolina is the second biggest banking center in the country and one of the biggest in the world. And that's why also you saw in the big taxpayer-sponsored bailouts of the banks that North Carolina, outside of Wall Street, received the most bailout money. The Bank of America, which subsumed Merrill Lynch, and then also Wachovia, which fell under Wells Fargo. So these are huge. Banking industry and finance is huge in this state. And this is a state that traditionally about 20% of workers worked in manufacturing, but increasingly it's been around service and banking. And so that's why you had an already fragile economy totally decimated by the changes in the global manufacturing, people being displaced. Now it's also found itself uniquely vulnerable to the fact that many people depend on finance. And again, this is an industry, obviously, finance industry isn't unionized much of anywhere, but particularly in a place like North Carolina, where it prides itself on having a business-friendly climate, a low tax rate, lax laws on the environment and other regulations. This is where you find a state that's uniquely in danger when it's facing massive dislocations and layoffs. The safety net just isn't there. Programs are always on the chopping block. And also in a place like South Carolina, where you have the school system has been the target of countless documentaries. It's been called the corridor of shame in some parts of South Carolina. The same situation where that's where it's particularly galling to people in these states when you find the governors playing politics with the recession and even saying they may decline federal stimulus funds that clearly the people in those states need.
And your state has also, obviously for years, been known as a military-friendly state, and the presence of military bases there has a huge impact on the economy. And with the continuing wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, has that been one of the few bright sides in terms of employment opportunities for the state?
Yeah, well, as much as you can say that depending on the military, if your economy is a bright side, that was interesting. In the latest round of a base realignment, most of the parts of the country lost in those proposals that were made about closing down military bases. The South was actually the place that came out ahead. We were supposed to gain jobs from having a growth in military bases, military contracts, even people who go into service are disproportionately from the South. About 56% of the troops are based in the South, so we really are the heart of the military-industrial complex in this country. And that's why, but it puts the state in a very difficult situation. Our governor says that we're the most military-friendly state. She wants to draw more military contracts here, expand the base of the military. But what happens when you have a national movement like you have in the United States of people questioning the role of the military internationally? And that brings into question whether or not the defense budget is there going to be cuts, what's going to mean for military contracting, and that means that people's lives are at risk. And that's the downside of a state becoming dependent on military spending for economic growth.
Blackwater here, Chris, was born here, right, is now known as XEZ, and you've been covering it at the Institute for Southern Studies.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's one of the pieces. Traditionally, North Carolina was the places we had bases. This is where you put the troops, they were based, or we had military contractors. Now we have weapon systems. Now it's the private, the security forces. And of course, Blackwaters has become infamous as a synonymous with the military contracting in the security industry. And the scandals, there's target of several lawsuits. They had to change their name, which is always a sign that they're in some sort of legal trouble. Now Z. And what's interesting is, they still have a presence. What people don't understand is they think that because of all the scandals and the lawsuits that their role has declined. And I think what we're finding through our research is that they still have a very strong presence, very strong foothold in the government contracting. There's some growing evidence they may be involved in Africa. And I think this is going to be another hotspot for people to be watching. But even as you see places like Blackwater decline, it seems like there's all these other companies jumping into their place. Another company we're following is Titan in Virginia, which is emerging as another one of the big security firms. And it is interesting that it's not just the government presence in the military that's big in the South, but it's also the private military industry, which has found a very strong toehold in the South and makes a lot of people dependent on that for the economy.
And what about extraordinary rendition and these private jets that fly, we believe now, thousands of people to places where they are tortured? What, like Aero Technologies, based here in North Carolina? Yeah,
based out of the Smithfield Air Force, a small airport. You'd hardly even know is there if you walked by. I've been there a few times. But yeah, there's the pilots who were accused by the German government and others of being involved in these extraordinary renditions. They live right next to this airport. They all have alternative identities, so it's kind of hard to find them. But yeah, clearly, and this is another way in which it's just kind of part of the fabric in many communities in the South, that the military is just part of it. And I think that's what people don't quite understand is people sometimes assume that Southerners just have a more conservative bent and embrace the military. I think it has more to do with the fact that many of them depend on the military. I know I have lots of relatives who are in the service or are connected to it somehow, and it's just part of the way of life here. And I think that's what people have to understand. Until you give people economic alternatives, until you find a way out for these Southern states being so dependent on the military, that's where you're going to find these situations where these states seem to embrace the foreign policy agenda, where I think in reality they don't.